The night is heavy. The streets empty. You hear footsteps behind you, slow and deliberate. A woman appears, her face hidden beneath a white surgical mask. Her voice is soft but chilling as she leans close, whispering, "Am I pretty?" Before you can respond, she pulls down the mask, revealing a grotesque slit where her mouth once was, the edges cruelly cut from ear to ear. A terrifying smile stretches impossibly wide. "Answer me," she hisses, "because no answer will save you." You want to run, but your legs won't move. Darkness swallows the street. Your fate is sealed. Welcome to the cursed tale of Kuchisake-onna, the Slit-Mouthed Woman. You're listening to the Sleepy Planet, where even the most terrifying stories are told gently, in darkness. Every night, let your mind drift through shadowed legends, soft narration, and low-light visuals designed to lull you into sleep. Subscribe now for more calm, haunting journeys into the world's strangest folklore. Now dim the lights. Let the story begin. It all started in beauty, not in blood. It was a time when the forests of Japan stretched farther than the eye could see, and lanterns were the only stars on Earth. Along a lonely road between Kyoto and the Sea of Japan stood a small village, forgotten by the march of time. The people there lived quiet lives: rice planters, potters, and weavers. They believed in spirits, in seasons, and in silence. And then, one spring, she arrived. The villagers didn't hear her coming. She was simply there one morning, standing beneath a flowering plum tree outside the tea house, with eyes lowered and lips painted red. Her kimono was silk, and her scent was moonlight. No one knew her name, and no one dared to ask. She bowed to every man who passed and smiled at every child who stared. In the days that followed, they called her Oniwa no Hana, the garden flower. She rented a room at the edge of the village, a small thatched house left empty by an old widow. Each morning, she swept her steps. Each evening, she lit a paper lantern and sat outside, humming a melody no one recognized. It was said her voice could calm a crying child. It was said her face could silence a crowded room. And most curiously, it was said she never ate in public. The village women watched her from behind rice screens and whispered, "A courtesan, perhaps." The men smiled too long when they passed her gate, yet she gave no one reason to speak ill of her. She never drank, never quarreled, never wandered. She simply existed, like a ghost that had forgotten it died. Children began to bring her flowers. Young men left offerings at her door: clay foxes, folded cranes, hand-bound poems. She accepted none of them, only smiling politely and returning each gift with a bow. Her mystery only deepened, her beauty untouched by time. But in places where silence lingers too long, whispers are born. Whispers that bloom like rot beneath the surface. It began with a child who claimed to have seen her eyes glow yellow one night beneath the plum tree. A silly story, easily dismissed. Then came the merchant's son. He had followed her one evening, hoping to catch a glimpse of her without her usual perfect posture and practiced grace. He never returned. His sandals were found near the river, torn and soaked with mud. The villagers grieved, but quietly. Accidents happened. Rivers took what they pleased. And yet, the whispers grew louder. The apothecary's dog refused to go near her house. One night, the priest's bell rang without wind. A farmer's wife swore she saw a second shadow following the woman, tall, crooked and twisted like a broken branch. One by one, villagers began locking their doors earlier. Even the bravest among them, the blacksmith's son and the woodcutter's boy, crossed to the other side of the road when passing her home. Still, she smiled. Still, she bowed. But those smiles began to feel practiced, as though she were wearing her face like a mask. There was one man who did not fear her. His name was Masaru. A wealthy merchant from a nearby town, he visited the village each month to collect handcrafted lanterns for the capital. Tall, bold, and proud, Masaru had made fortunes through charm and trade. He had known many women, some beautiful, some wise, but none quite like her. He saw her once in passing, and his heart did not flutter. It stopped. The next morning, he returned to the village. By nightfall, he had found her home and bowed low at her gate. She did not speak, only looked at him with those moonlit eyes. He returned again the next day, and the next. For 2 weeks, Masaru brought her gifts, silks, perfumes, and sweets from Kyoto's inner markets. On the 15th day, she opened her door. No one knows what they said to each other, but from that night on, the paper lantern outside her home remained unlit. They married in the fall. The ceremony was small, held beneath the same plum tree where she had first appeared. Masaru moved into her home, away from the capital, away from his trade. He said he wanted peace, simplicity. She said nothing at all. The village feigned celebration. They drank and danced, but unease clung to them like smoke. Children were told to stay inside. Dogs howled at moonless nights. And still, the couple walked the village like painted dolls, perfect, untouched, and utterly silent. And then, people began to disappear. It was always at night. A farmer heading home from his fields vanished, his tools found snapped in half near a rock. A girl from the weaving house, gone, her robe discovered shredded beneath the torii gate. And always the same story, whispered by neighbors, told in half-sentences and fearful glances. They saw her, standing beneath the lantern, smiling through her mask. Because yes, after the wedding, she began wearing one. A white silk mask tied gently behind her ears. It covered her nose and mouth completely, hiding even the smallest smile. When asked why, Masaru simply replied, "My wife has taken ill. She must protect herself." But there were no signs of illness, no fevers, no coughing, no paleness, only silence, and a presence that grew heavier with each passing day. One evening, the village elder called for a private gathering. Only the oldest and wisest were invited. They met beneath the old shrine, candlelight flickering against carved dragon wood. "We have allowed a shadow into our midst," he said. Some protested. "She has done no crime. We have no proof." The elder replied with a whisper, "Sometimes proof is the body that never returns." But even in fear, the village was paralyzed. Who would confront her? Who would risk angering whatever dwelled behind that mask? And so they did nothing. And she continued to walk the streets at dusk, her steps slow, her presence cold. The mask never moved, but some swore they could hear her voice beneath it, murmuring something soft and dreadful. Then one night, the mask came off, but only one man lived to speak of it, and he would never speak again. No storm begins with thunder. It begins in silence, like the one that settled inside the merchant's home. After the wedding, the villagers noticed a change. Not in her, But in Masaru, his boldness faded. His warmth turned brittle. He rarely left their home now, rarely smiled. At the tea house, he sat alone and drank far too long. The other men noticed. The wives noticed more. "She still walks alone," whispered a seamstress. "She never lets him touch her in public," muttered the old sake brewer. "She speaks to the potter's son too kindly," hissed a jealous maid. It didn't matter if it was true. Masaru heard them all, and rumors, once planted, grow like weeds in the heart. At first, it was questions. "Where did you go today? Who was that you bowed to? Why do you smile when you walk?" She never answered. She only bowed or tilted her head. Some nights she wrote him small notes in calligraphy, each as gentle as a falling leaf. "You are my son. I walk because I cannot sit in a cage. The sky smiles, and I mirror it. Beautiful lies. Or perhaps beautiful truths he could no longer trust." Masaru began locking the door when he left. Soon, he began locking it when he stayed inside. There was one day, bright and cloudless, when she was seen by the well, speaking to a young samurai in training. The boy, barely past 17, laughed too loudly. She bowed, her sleeves trailing softly against her sides. That night, Masaru did not eat, nor did she. At midnight, neighbors heard something strange, glass breaking, wood splintering, a low sound like an animal growling. But no one dared check. Come morning, the lantern outside their home remained unlit. The window shutters were nailed closed. The next day, she wore a scarf, not just over her neck, but across her face, tied tight, hiding her mouth and jaw. When asked why, Masaru answered for her. "She is unwell." But the villagers already knew. The way she moved was different now. Not slower, just smaller. Like a candle afraid of being snuffed out. She stopped looking into people's eyes. Her smiles, those beautiful, breathtaking smiles, were gone. She began to shrink from sunlight. Masaru changed too. He walked taller, faster, eyes sharp, always watching. When men spoke of his wife now, it was in hushed tones and careful words. He no longer brought her to festivals, no longer allowed her to gather herbs or water. Even the children no longer saw her outside. He claimed it was love. But what love needs cages? One night, the village's priest, an old man who once fought in wars, paid a visit. He asked gently if she wished to speak. He never got the chance. Masaru stood at the door with a sword, not drawn, but resting loosely in his hand. "She is my wife," he said. "She has no need for prayers." A week passed, and then came the storm. The wind screamed through the trees like a warning. Rain hammered down on the rooftops. Lanterns blew out across the village, one by one, until all that remained were the lights behind their shutters. But in one house, the merchant's home, the light stayed on. And inside, a voice rose. "You smile at them, but not at me. I do not smile at anyone. You walk past their homes like you belong to them. I have only ever belonged to myself. You shame me. I am not yours to shame." The argument was heard through the cracks in the walls by a boy hiding beneath the veranda. Ichiro, the blacksmith's apprentice. He had come to return a scarf his master's wife had borrowed, and stayed when he heard shouting. What he saw next would haunt him until the end of his days. A flash of lightning lit the house from within. The woman stood at the center, hands raised. not in defense but pleading. Masaru's face was twisted, not with rage, but with something worse. Despair laced with fury. He did not want to harm her, but he could not bear her beauty any longer. The blade was not sharp. It was a lacquered fan, snapped in half, its edge jagged like broken teeth, the kind of thing that could tear flesh, not slice it clean. He moved fast. 2 strides, a lunge, a scream, then silence. When the door burst open, Ichiro wasn't alone. 2 other men had run with him, drawn by the sound. What they found was not a murder. It was something far stranger. Masaru knelt over her, hands trembling. His mouth moved soundlessly. She lay there, eyes wide, not with fear, but something else. Disappointment. Blood ran down her cheeks, staining the floor. Her mouth, split wide, torn from ear to ear. Not clean, not neat. A red crescent of agony carved across her once perfect face. And yet, she did not cry. She only reached for her mask, a silk cloth. She pressed it to her face. Then she stood. The other men froze. One whispered, "What is she?" She walked past them, slowly, calmly. Outside, the storm waited. She stepped into it without an umbrella, without a lantern, without a word. The wind did not touch her, the rain did not soak her, and the next morning she was gone. Masaru was arrested, but when the guards came to fetch him, they found only a note scrawled on his wall. "She is still beautiful." He had vanished. His blade remained, still wet. For weeks, the villagers searched the woods, searched the rivers, the shrine, the mountain paths, but there was no sign of her, no body, no footprints, only the plum tree, blooming strangely out of season, as though fed by something deeper than water. And then, the children began whispering. They said a woman in a mask had appeared at the edge of the forest. She asked a question. "Am I pretty?" They said she waited, silent, until you answered. They said no answer was ever right. Some stories die quietly, others breathe. They pass from child to child, parent to child, priest to pilgrim, until no one remembers the truth, only the shape of it. The slit-mouthed woman did not die that stormy night. She changed. She left behind her name, her home, her husband. What remained was the question, "Am I pretty?" They said she asked it with a tilt of her head, polite as a courtesan, her kimono tattered, her hair black as nightfall, and her mask, always white, always hiding something worse beneath. "Am I pretty?" If you said yes, she removed her mask, revealed the gash, the red smile, then asked again, "Even now?" And if you said no, she cut you. And if you said yes again, she cut you wider, so you could match her. The village denied it. "There are no ghosts here," said the priest. "Just frightened children," said the healer. But behind their eyes, they remembered the storm. They remembered the woman. They remembered the silence of her disappearance. And when the plum trees bloomed a second time in winter, the villagers hung charms on every door. Still, life must pretend to move forward. So they planned the Autumn Moon Festival, a time of lanterns, of dances, of offerings for the harvest gods. They hoped joy could suffocate fear, that light could blind the shadows. Children helped hang banners. Women painted paper lamps. Even the priest smiled for the first time in months. No one saw the mask nailed to the back wall of the empty shrine. No one knew who put it there. On the night of the festival, laughter returned. Drums echoed through the hills. Girls in bright yukata danced in the square. Men roasted sweet potatoes, poured warm sake, told ghost stories. Ironically, one favorite tale was hers. They say if you see her and you lie, she'll follow you for 7 nights. If you scream, she feeds on your voice. You must confuse her. Tell her she's average. They laughed too loudly. None of them noticed the girl in the red scarf listening from the edge of the crowd. Her name was Nanai, 13, a seamstress's daughter. She wasn't dancing. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't eating. She stood near the tree where the plum blossoms had begun to bloom too early again. And she waited. For what? No one asked. When the final drumbeat faded and the sky turned from amber to black, the villagers began packing up. One by one, they left. But Nanai didn't return home. Her mother called for her at dawn. No answer. The town gathered quickly, fanning out through forest paths, across rice paddies, into shrines and wells. And then they found the scarf, tied to the plum tree, wet, but not with dew. Beneath it, something white, a mask. The old priest trembled when he saw it, not because it was a mask, but because it was hers, the same one they had buried at the shrine door months ago. He had nailed it shut, hidden it, tried to burn it. It didn't burn. He turned to the girl's mother and said only, "She has returned." They searched until nightfall. Not a footprint, not a sign of struggle. Not even birdsong remained in that grove. From that day, something changed in the air. The children walked in pairs. The women stopped wearing red. Men spoke less and listened more. And the mask kept moving. It was next seen on the steps of the schoolhouse, then at the well. Then, one dusk, nailed to a tree facing the village gate. Each time it was clean, unbroken, but wet. Not with rain, and never with morning dew. The priest knew what was happening. He went to the shrine and fasted, prayed, burned incense, dug through scrolls of yokai lore. But there was no name for her. She was not a fox spirit, not a vengeful widow, not a hungry ghost. She was something older, born not of magic, but of pain sharpened into a question. He gathered the villagers by the river, warned them, "Do not walk alone. Do not answer the question. Do not look behind the mask." But fear turns even truth into superstition. Some obeyed, others mocked, especially the boys. 3 of them, Kaito, Ren, and Jun, were seen wandering past the plum tree that week. They wore paper masks and mimicked her voice. "Am I pretty?" one squeaked. "Even now?" The other laughed. The third, Jun, carried a fan broken like a blade. They thought it was a game. That night, Kaito didn't return home. The next morning, the villagers found his mask. Hung on a branch, split down the middle, the priest collapsed later that day. His heart, they said, but some whispered he died of fear. They buried him at the shrine, next to the lanterns he once lit. And when they returned home, they found plum blossoms at every doorstep. No one lit the lanterns that winter. Even the moon seemed to turn its back on the village. Nights fell faster, and mornings arrived in bruises of fog. The children no longer played. The forest trails, once rich with bird song and rustling deer, grew silent. Even the rice fields, barren and cold, held still as if listening. And always, there was the question, whispered behind closed doors. Who will be next? When the old priest died, so did the last thread of certainty. He had known something, an old name, a forgotten truth. Now the mask moved freely. It was seen in windows, reflected in wells, tied to doorways that should have been safe. The villagers hung charms made from rice stalks and salt. They carved crude ofuda and taped them over the shrine's doors. But nothing helped. Until the stranger arrived. He came on foot, wrapped in heavy robes the color of moss. His straw hat cast his face in shadow, but his voice was calm, even amused, as he approached the village gates. On his back, he carried a lacquered wooden box. He said he was a traveler of the spirit roads, a hunter of hungry ghosts, a yokai binder. They didn't trust him at first. He was too well fed for a monk, too quick to smile for someone who claimed to have seen death walk. But desperation dulls suspicion. He set up camp beside the shrine and built a ring of ash, stone, and iron nails around it. He placed small statues, 6 of them, carved with weeping faces, at each compass point. And then he opened the box. Inside, dozens of masks. Old, beautiful, terrifying. Kabuki faces with snarling teeth, foxes with bleeding eyes, blank ones that reflected nothing. He chose one, a plain woman's face, no slit, no smile. He placed it in the center of the ring. This, he said, is where she will come. For 3 nights, he fasted and burned incense. He chanted softly in a dialect no one knew. On the 4th day, the villagers found something new. The white mask, her mask, resting at the edge of the ring, clean, whole. The binder did not smile. She is listening, he said, but not yet bound. He began teaching them protections, thin red threads to tie around their ankles, a charm to whisper before answering a question, symbols to carve above mirrors and under pillows. The children practiced them faithfully. The women stitched them into sleeves and collars. And slowly, the sightings stopped. No more masks. No more disappearances. No more plum blossoms in winter. For the first time in months, the villagers dared to sleep through the night. The binder stayed, quiet and constant, performing silent rituals by the shrine. He spoke little, ate less, always kept the box beside him. When asked what was inside, what else he carried, he only said, "You wouldn't want to know what listens through wood." Spring came early. Cranes returned to the rice fields. Children laughed again, softly, cautiously. Even the well began to reflect sunlight instead of shadows. They spoke of rebuilding the priest's quarters, of planting new trees by the shrine. The village began to hope, until the girl laughed. Her name was May, only 6, a farmer's daughter with too much curiosity and no fear. She often wandered near the shrine, fascinated by the weeping statues and the mysterious man with the mask box. He'd given her a charm once, red paper folded into a butterfly. and she trusted him. Everyone did. But on the 7th night of spring, someone heard her laughter. Not in her home, not in her bed, but outside the shrine, laughing, giggling, as if someone were playing with her, or asking her something. The village gathered by torchlight. They found her charm, ripped in half, and the red thread around her ankle, cut, but no footprints, no body, no cry. Just silence, and something worse. The box had moved. It was no longer beside the binder's bedroll. It now stood in the center of the ritual circle, and it was open. The binder stared at it for a long time, then turned to the crowd and said softly, "She has learned to mimic laughter." The villagers stood frozen, staring at the open box. Its once polished lacquer now appeared blistered, like skin scalded by boiling water. The red threads around it had frayed to ash. The salt had melted into the earth, and the mask inside, the mask of the woman, was gone. The binder knelt beside it. He didn't speak at first. He pressed a finger to the soil, then touched the edge of the box with careful reverence. His eyes were not filled with fear. They were filled with memory. "Where is May?" someone asked, stepping forward. "What did you do?" The binder didn't answer. Not immediately. He ran one hand across his chest and drew out a small charm, a coin bent and warped with time. He clutched it tightly and said, "This is not the first time she has come to me." The villagers grew still, and so he began his story. He was 11 at that time, just a boy in another village, not unlike theirs. A boy who followed his older brother everywhere, including places they weren't allowed. That night, the fire had gutted half the town. No one knew how it started, but they all remembered how fast it spread. Rice paper walls curled into embers. Tatami mats turned to smoke. Screams filled the streets. Horses broke loose. And the shrine, their shrine, cracked and crumbled into ash. He remembered the heat, the panic, and the feeling that something was watching them from the smoke. He and his brother had run into the hills, toward the old roads, where statues of foxes stood watch beneath moss and moonlight. It was there that he heard her. At first, he thought it was his brother speaking. The voice was soft, barely louder than the rustling leaves. "Am I pretty?" He turned. His brother stood just ahead, frozen, mouth slightly open, eyes wide. Then he heard it again, closer now, right behind him. "Am I pretty?" And when he turned, he saw her. She wore a red kimono, not bright red, wet red, like silk dipped in blood. Her hair was long and straight, falling past her shoulders like curtains of shadow. A mask covered her face, white, plain, too still. She tilted her head. "Am I pretty?" The binder, the boy, said nothing. He wanted to run. But his brother stepped forward. "Yes," the boy whispered. The woman removed her mask. Her mouth had been sliced open from ear to ear, ragged, wet, smiling. "Even now?" she asked. His brother stuttered, trembled. "No," he whispered. And she smiled wider. He didn't remember the scream. He didn't remember running or falling, or when the blood hit his face. He only remembered waking up in a ditch the next morning, alone, his brother gone, and the coin charm clenched in his fist. Someone had placed it there. Not his brother, not his mother, her. "I never saw him again," the binder said softly, his voice rough with age. But that was the first time I saw her, the first time I understood that some spirits don't want to be laid to rest. They want to be remembered, to be feared. The villagers stood in silence. One of the elders stepped forward. "You knew she would return, and you brought that box here?" "I brought it to contain her." "Then why is it open?" The binder didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to the soil just beneath the box, where a new footprint had formed. Small, bare, a child's. The whisper came again that night, not from the shrine, not from the trees, from within the village, from behind doors, behind mirrors. "Am I pretty?" The voice echoed like a memory, not screamed, not spoken, just remembered. A man in the east house gouged out the glass of his window. He claimed he saw her smile in his reflection. A mother covered every mirror in her home with cloth, but in the steam of her bathhouse, a face still formed. And outside the schoolhouse, drawn in ash along the wall, a new mask. Smaller than before, rounder, wider eyes, the shape of a child's face. The villagers returned to the binder in fury. "She took May," one cried. "She followed you here," another spat. "You opened the box." The binder stood still, arms crossed in his sleeves. "She was never bound," he said. The headman stepped forward. "Then bind her. Use your charms, your salt, your fox statues, whatever you need. Just end this." The binder's voice grew low. "You don't bind a curse," he said. "You feed it." They pressed him further, demanded to know what he meant. He refused, until the headman lifted his staff and pointed it at the lacquered box. "Tell us," he said, "or we burn it." The binder bowed his head. And then he told them, the masks weren't tools. They were promises. Each mask held a soul's echo. Not a ghost, not a spirit, but a memory that refused to fade. He collected them not to fight, but to contain. And the mask of the Slit-Mouthed Woman had been the most difficult, because it wasn't just a memory. It was a question that once heard could never be forgotten. "Am I pretty?" He had trapped her once, only once, in that mask, by offering her something she had never received. Pity, not fear, not hatred, not silence. He had looked at her torn face and said softly, "I'm sorry." And for a moment, her mouth had closed. That's when he carved the mask, poured in the ash, and sealed it with blood. And still, she smiled. But now something had changed. She had tasted fear again, children's fear. And with it, she had split. No longer one mask. Now, two. Now, a second version of herself, reborn with May's laughter. More innocent, more dangerous. Because no one questions a child when she asks for a smile. That night, the village did not sleep. They sat with their backs to doors. They placed rice bowls outside their windows. They whispered charms to their children until their throats bled dry. But nothing stopped the dream. A shared dream. The same one for every soul. A girl stood in the shrine. Her mouth was covered by a tiny mask. She pointed to the box and whispered, "You said you could keep her safe." Then she laughed, and the world shattered like glass. There was no wind that morning, No bird call, no footsteps, not even the creak of the shrine's roof. The village had fallen silent. Children were no longer allowed to speak. Mothers wrote instructions in ink. Fathers carried long sticks and tapped warnings into the ground. Even the temple bell, once rung at sunrise, remained untouched. Because the curse had learned to move through sound. And not just sound, but language. A whisper in a dream. A phrase heard twice. A question remembered by the wrong person. Am I pretty? The binder gathered the villagers. He spoke not with words, but with gestures, drawings in the dirt, glances passed between the brave and the terrified. He explained that they were no longer dealing with one spirit, but two, the woman, the girl. And both of them asked the same thing. Both of them remembered the ones who answered. Even if the answer was never said aloud, even if it was only thought. They couldn't speak the words anymore. They couldn't write them. And soon, they would not even be able to think them. A child had dreamed again. This time, not of a shrine, but of a room with no windows. There was only a mirror and a voice. The girl stood behind her, tilting her head. "If you can't answer," she said, "I'll open your mouth for you." The child woke up screaming, but she had no tongue. The binder sat beneath the elder tree that night. His tools lay scattered around him: bone chisels, clay pots, thin sheets of cherry wood. He had once carved masks to contain souls. Now he carved to erase memory. This new mask would have no eyes, no mouth, only a blank surface of pale ash. It would not hold a spirit. It would hold silence. He worked without sleep, without pause. His hands bled into the wood. He didn't wipe it away. The blood belonged there. Part of the price. Each stroke of the chisel was a forgetting. Each cut a severing of connection, until the mask looked back at him like a forgotten face. No identity, no question, only emptiness. And in the center of its brow, he pressed his own name, inverted, so that if it failed, the spirit would know who to find. He brought it to the headman. The mask was wrapped in black cloth, soaked in oil and sage. The binder said it should be placed on the one most haunted, the one who dreamed most vividly. That was the Takata girl, 7 years old, May's best friend. Her parents wept as they laid her down. The binder placed the mask over her sleeping face. No response. He waited. 1 hour. 2. The girl stirred, a twitch, a murmur, and then she began to laugh. It was soft at first, not cruel, not forced, just childlike. She lifted the mask from her face and smiled up at the binder. He stepped back. Something was wrong. The mask hadn't bound her. It had fed her. The Takata girl sat up and whispered, voice lilting, "You tried to make me forget her, but she's part of me now." The binder's hand trembled. She stood. The villagers screamed as she walked past them, toward the shrine, toward the box. Her feet left wet prints on the floor, though no one had seen water. Or was it water? He chased her, through the shrine, through the cracked doors, through the fading light, until she stopped. And there she was, waiting. Not the girl, not the Takata child. The other one, wearing a child's face. The second mask, the spirit that had split. The binder fell to his knees. She stepped forward, tilted her head. "You gave her silence," she said. "Now she hears only me." He looked up. "What do you want?" She smiled, but did not answer. He understood then. This was no longer about being pretty. This was about being remembered. As long as the village feared her, she lived. As long as they taught the children to be quiet, she grew louder. As long as he tried to contain her, she spread. That night, the binder locked himself in the shrine. He laid out every mask he had ever carved, 37. One for each soul he'd tried to bind. Foxes, demons, wives, thieves, children, old women, warped faces and beautiful ones, all of them. He took a blade and began to destroy them, one by one. The villagers heard the cracking of wood deep into the night. They saw the firelight flicker through the shrine's lattice. And in the morning, they found the binder lying beside the broken box, his own mask carved into his face. He was still alive, but barely. His mouth was sewn shut, eyes gouged, hands burned. And yet, in blood across the shrine wall, he had written, "She cannot ask what you do not hear." The snow had begun to fall when he descended the eastern path. A man in ragged robes, burnt at the sleeves, fingers blackened with soot, eyes bright as winter lanterns. He carried no offerings, no prayer beads, no scrolls, only a bell, cracked, silent, tied with red twine. The villagers saw him from the fields, a blur in the storm, and though none had spoken for weeks, one of them whispered, "The path is sealed. No one should come from that side." No one answered. They only watched, and the monk kept walking. The shrine was still. Inside, the binder lay curled like a withered root, lips sealed with black thread, dried blood in the corners of his eyes. He didn't stir as the monk knelt beside him. But the monk did not speak. He touched the blood-smeared wall, ran his thumb over the phrase scratched into the wood. "She cannot ask what you do not hear." And beside it, carved faintly deeper, hidden in the grain of the timber, a second line. "But you still remember, don't you?" The monk closed his eyes. He did. That night, he rang the broken bell. Once, the sound was not a chime. It was a breath drawn inward. The villagers came to the shrine, slowly, cautiously. The monk was seated in the center, a circle of ash and salt around him. He gestured for them to sit. He spoke without preamble. "There are 2 questions she asks, but only one is ever answered." They stared. He continued, "You hear the first, 'Am I pretty?' You answer, but in doing so, you trigger the second." One man dared to speak in a hoarse whisper, "What is the second?" The monk smiled, grim. "You've never survived long enough to hear it." He told them her tale was older than the shrine, older than the village, older than the name Kuchisake. There had been a woman before the split, before the mask, before the question. A woman bound to another man's silence. A husband who lied. A master who punished. A healer who cut. Each time she swallowed her rage, bit her tongue, smiled where she should have screamed, until something inside her opened. not a wound. A mouth. The monk held up his left hand. The villagers saw for the first time what he truly carried. A brand burned into his palm, an eye sewn shut. "Her mouth is not her own," he said. "It is the voice of every woman who died unheard." And then he told them her name, but not aloud. He wrote it in ash, and even as the wind tried to erase it, it clung to the wood. It was not Kuchisake-onna. It was something older, twisted, forgotten. And it was not a name to be spoken. It was a contract. The monk stood. "If you let her ask, she enters you. If you answer, you are bound." One woman stepped forward, May's mother. She held the mask the binder had carved, the one meant to erase memory. "Then how do we stop her?" The monk turned to her. "You don't stop her. You let her speak. That's suicide. Not if I wear the mask." They prepared the shrine, salt at the corners, bells turned upside down, the mask set on a black pillow in the center of the floor. The monk sat cross-legged. He closed his eyes. "When I put on the mask," he said, "she will ask. But she cannot see me. She must wear my voice." The villagers hesitated. "How does she wear it?" He smiled, sadly. "You let her in." They waited for nightfall. The bell rang once more. A deeper chime this time, like stone cracking under ice, and the monk placed the mask upon his face. For a moment, there was silence. And then, "Am I pretty?" The voice was small, soft, childlike, but wrong. It came from inside the monk. The villagers leaned closer. He did not answer. She asked again, "Am I pretty?" Still no reply. A third time, "Am I pretty?" And then another voice answered. Not the monk, not anyone in the room. A whisper from beneath the floorboards. "No." The mask cracked. A red line appeared down the center. The monk's body shivered, once, and then relaxed. But his head turned slowly, not by his own will. He stood, but his feet did not move, his arms outstretched, and the mask fell. Beneath it, a mouth not belonging to the monk. It was too wide, too red, too hungry, and behind it, his eyes rolled back, white with flame. He spoke a name, not hers, his own, and she laughed. She was in him now. The monk who came with fire, the monk who rang the bell. He had invited her. She wore him like a robe. And then, for the first time, she whispered the second question, the one none had lived to hear. "Would you love me, even like this?" The villagers froze, and the monk's body collapsed. They buried him without a name, without rites, without sound. And still, days later, the youngest children could be heard whispering in their sleep, "Would you love me, even like this?" There was once a house on the edge of the cypress woods, near the southern border of Aomori. No road led to it, no path curved near it, and still, it remained untouched. Not because it was sacred, because it was silent. Children said the wind bent around it, that birds grew mute above it, that at night, if you pressed your ear to the earth, You could hear someone whispering beneath the floorboards, not in terror, but in answer. To what? No one knew. Only that the girl inside was never allowed to speak, and never allowed to sleep with her eyes shut. Her name was Asami, though her mother never used it. In that house, names were not spoken, not even in sleep. She was born premature, her lungs underdeveloped. She cried only once, just after birth, and the sound was hoarse, broken, like breath trying to become words. The midwife whispered, she shouldn't have survived. But her father had simply looked at the silent girl, wrapped in cloth, and said, good, then she's already half ghost. They had moved there after the bell broke, after the monk fell, after the questions began. For a time, her father taught in the North Village, but students whispered the name. Farmers dreamed of teeth. A widow heard her son ask, would you love me like this? In a voice that wasn't his. So her father fled to build silence. The house had no mirrors, no glass, no metal polished enough to reflect. Every door frame was sealed with rice paper, stitched in lines that said, only forward, never back. Each room faced east, as if waiting for the sun to remind them this world still turned, this world still had time. But Asami's room was different. It had no windows, only salt-lined walls. Each night, her mother told stories, not with voice, but with chalk. She'd draw shapes on a black tile, spirals for animals, crosses for danger. A spiral with a broken edge meant, do not dream. Then her father would unroll the night mat, paint a white circle around Asami's body, and speak 3 times. No name, no mirror, no mouth. Asami would nod, and then, eyes open, lips closed, she'd fall asleep. The first whisper came in winter. She did not mean to answer. It came like breath on a window, cold and close. Am I pretty? Asami blinked and thought, yes, but did not say it. Then, would you love me like this? Still no answer. But in her chest, something stirred. A voice not hers, a breath not drawn, a memory she hadn't lived. She woke before sunrise, eyes burning, her pillow wet with tears she hadn't felt. At the foot of her mat was a mask, not carved, not painted, drawn in salt, as if someone had been there, kneeling, watching. She didn't tell her parents, only erased the lines and whispered into the wall, "Why do you ask?" The next night, the whisper returned. "Am I pretty?" Asami stared at the ceiling. The voice came from nowhere, and yet it felt like it came from her own mouth. She did not answer. She asked again, "Why do you ask?" There was a pause, then a voice, not hers, soft and low. "Because no one sees me anymore." The following morning, her mother entered with breakfast and froze. On the back wall, scratched into the wood in long, splintered strokes, was a drawing. 2 faces, one whole, one split, both smiling. Her mother scrubbed it out with vinegar. She didn't ask Asami how it got there, but that night the salt circle was doubled, and the stories stopped. Days passed. No whispers, only the hush of snow. The tick of the wind chime outside, made from bones instead of metal. Then, one night, new moon, no stars, Asami blinked, and someone was sitting in the corner. Not a woman, not a child. Something between. Draped in red cloth, mouth bound with silk, hair long enough to touch the floor, and Asami wasn't afraid. She whispered, "Are you the one who asks?" The figure tilted its head. The eyes behind the hair were hollow. "No," it said. "She's inside you now." The next day, Asami spoke for the first time. She didn't mean to. Her mother was placing water on the floor, and Asami, watching the ripples, whispered, "She's not alone anymore." Her mother dropped the cup and ran to fetch her father. They sat Asami in the center of the room, laid out strips of parchment, inked prayers with trembling hands. But the moment her father read the first line aloud, Asami smiled, and in a voice not hers said, "Would you love me like this?" The ink turned to blood. The parchment curled, and her mother screamed. But Asami didn't move. She just watched the wall behind them, where, slowly, a mirror was forming. Not of glass, of shadow, and in it, her reflection smiled wider. They tried to seal the room, burned sage, cut their own palms and bled into the floorboards, spoke every name they knew, except hers. Asami didn't sleep for 3 days, not because she was afraid, because when she closed her eyes, the girl in the shadow smiled back and said, "We don't sleep anymore. We remember." In desperation, her father did the one thing he swore never to do. He returned to the shrine, to the place where the monk had died. He brought no offerings, no mask, only the broken bell. And when he rang it, once, it did not chime. It breathed, the same way it had before. And from the woods, someone answered. A woman stepped forward. Not young, not old. Face hidden by a wide hat, hands wrapped in thread. She did not introduce herself. She only said, "The girl has begun to echo. She is becoming a mouth." "Can you save her?" he asked. "No," the woman said, "but I can teach her to ask better questions." Back at the house, Asami was drawing. With fingernails, with bone. No longer just faces. Mouths. Everywhere. Under the floor. On the ceiling. Inside her own wrist. When her parents tried to clean them, the drawings reappeared in their dreams. When they spoke, they heard their own voices twice, once from their mouths and once from the corners of the room. That night, the woman entered. She carried no tools, no chance, only silence. Asami looked up and said, "She lives in me now." The woman nodded. "Then let's teach her something new." She took a needle, pricked Asami's thumb, drew a circle on her forehead with the blood, and whispered, "Ask her what she remembers." That night, the voice returned, but it did not ask. It waited, and Asami, half asleep, said, "Who hurt you?" There was a silence, then a voice, raw, wet, like breath torn from a broken rib. "All of them." "Why do you want to be loved?" Another silence. "Because I never was." What happens if someone does? The shadow behind the wall flickered, twitched. Then I'll have to stop. Asami slept, truly, deeply, for the first time in months. When her mother came in the next morning, the room was empty of drawings. Only one shape remained on the far wall. A circle, and beneath it, a single question. Would you love me like this? A new figure appears at the village edge. They had never seen a shadow like hers. She came silently, a figure wrapped in crimson robes, moving like smoke through the mist that blanketed the narrow streets at dusk. The flicker of her red lantern was the only sign she was near, casting distorted faces onto the paper walls of the houses she passed. No one dared speak to her, not even the children who once laughed near the river. Their voices had all been swallowed by the thickening silence. The Red Lantern Widow, so they called her. They said she was once a bride, married on a clear summer day, with promises whispered beneath sakura trees. But her happiness was stolen. Her lips were sewn shut, crimson thread cutting cruel lines into her pale skin. Some whispered she was a victim of Kuchisake-onna's curse, a survivor who had tried to answer the terrible question. Others said she was the curse's next incarnation, a warning given flesh. Asami watched her from the edge of the woods, wrapped in her salt circle. The widow's lantern glow reached through the trees, a haunting pulse that made the air shimmer. Asami's reflection twisted in the dark puddles. She felt the whisper. Not from outside, but inside. Would you love me like this? The widow approached the village shrine, the one Asami's father had once fled. Her red robes brushed the fallen leaves. Her silent presence pulled at the threads of memory, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The villagers locked their doors and closed their windows. But one old woman, bent with age and secrets, stepped forward. "Who are you?" the woman whispered, voice cracking like dry paper. The widow lifted her lantern higher, and in the flickering light, the old woman saw the stitches, the cruel lines that sealed the widow's mouth. The widow reached into her robes and pulled out a small mirror, cracked and tarnished. She held it out silently. The old woman peered into the glass. Her breath caught. Inside the mirror, she saw not her own reflection, but the face of a girl. The girl's eyes were wide, haunted, and behind a mask that seemed to ripple like water. And then, slowly, the mask slid away, revealing the slit mouth. A scream froze in the woman's throat. She stumbled back, clutching her chest. The widow's lantern flickered and dimmed, and the village felt the cold seep into their bones. Back in her salt circle, Asami shivered. The voice was louder now. "Would you love me like this?" Her own reflection in the pond was distorted, the slit mouth widening beyond human limits. She closed her eyes tightly, but when she opened them, the widow was there, standing just beyond the trees. The widow raised her mirror, and in its cracked surface, Asami saw herself, not as she was, but as she would become. A mouth sewn tight, a ghost trapped forever between worlds. The old woman gathered the villagers. She told stories, ancient prayers to protect from restless spirits. They built charms from cedar wood and brushed ash on their doorways. The widow's lantern was placed at the village entrance, a warning, a ward. For a time, the nights were quieter. But Asami knew better. The boundary had thinned. The nightmare was only beginning. That night, The lantern's flame flickered wildly. Shadows danced in impossible shapes. The widow's voice came not from her mouth, but from the mirror. "Will you love me like this?" The village heard the words, and no answer could save them now. The air grew thick with silence. The village held its breath as Asami stepped beyond the salt circle for the first time since the curse took hold. Her eyes fixed on the shrine, where shadows pooled like spilled ink beneath the gnarled trees. There, waiting, the origin of all the nightmare. The slit-mouthed woman, not as a ghost, but as a being forged in hatred and sorrow. She was neither fully alive nor dead. Her mouth, a brutal slash across pale skin, stitched crudely with black thread. Her eyes, hollow wells reflecting centuries of pain. In her hands, a mirror cracked from age and blood. The wind whispered, carrying her voice like a cold blade. "Am I pretty?" Asami's heart pounded, but she did not falter. She remembered the old woman's words, prayers woven in cedar and ash. But more than prayers, the truth. The curse was born from betrayal. Long ago, a woman loved deeply, only to be torn apart by jealousy and violence. Her mutilation was not random cruelty. It was a scar carved by those who feared her beauty, her power, her freedom. The slit mouth was a sentence, a curse meant to silence her forever. But the spirit behind it was not just a victim. She was a prisoner, trapped by pain and rage, bound to repeat her torment endlessly. To break the cycle, Asami knew she had to face what no one dared, the truth behind the mask. She stepped forward and met the spirit's hollow gaze. "Why?" she whispered. The slit-mouthed woman lifted her mirror. Within it, images flickered. Faces of the past, the present, and the possible futures. Asami saw herself, the village, and countless others trapped in the endless loop. "Because you ask," the spirit's voice echoed. "Because beauty is a question with no answer." Asami reached out, fingers trembling, and touched the mirror. A shiver raced through her. Memories of pain, fear, and loneliness flooding her mind. She saw the first betrayal, the blood-stained night when the mouth was carved. She saw the women who came after, each meeting the same fate. And then she saw herself, a link in the chain. The spirit spoke again, softer now. "Will you love me like this?" The words echoed in the darkness, wrapping around Asami's soul. She realized the curse was not just about fear. It was about acceptance. Acceptance of the parts of ourselves that we hide, the wounds that shape us. Asami closed her eyes and let the silence grow. When she opened them, she made her choice. She would not run. She would not hide behind masks. She would break the cycle. With a steady voice, she answered, "Yes." The spirit's mouth trembled, the black thread unraveling like smoke in the wind. The lantern's flame flickered brighter, casting warm light over the village for the first time in generations. The curse began to lift. The slit mouth faded into a gentle smile. The spirit's hollow eyes softened, filled with peace. The village felt the weight ease, the shadows retreat. Asami's courage had broken the endless loop of fear and silence. But as the dawn rose, a new question lingered in the air. A whisper carried on the breeze. "Am I pretty?" because curses never truly die. They only wait, waiting for the next question, the next answer, the next soul to wander too close to the edge of darkness. The story ends here, but the question remains. Would you dare to answer? Thank you for journeying with the Sleepy Planet into the dark heart of Kuchisake-onna. If you are still awake and felt the chill, remember to subscribe and share, so you never miss the stories that linger in the shadows, whispered before sleep.